invite our speaker Leo to begin with his lecture today, but I want to remind you just a year ago in September 2013, Leo was here talking about bicycling through history, Iowa's love affair with two-wheel travel. And that's because we have an exhibit down in our building in Des Moines about ragbri and bicycling through the ages in Iowa. But his latest endeavor has been to work on the Iowans and Hollywood exhibit, and he will tell you a great deal about that. But as a museum curator, Landis works with 100,000 artifacts in our museum collection in Des Moines. He previously worked at Living History Farms in Urbandale, Prairie, and Fishers, Indiana, and spent 8 years as a curator at the Henry Ford Museum in Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan. He received his Bachelor of Science in History from Iowa State University, his Master's of Arts in Historical Administration from Eastern Illinois University in Charleston, Illinois, and has completed all but his dissertation towards a PhD in history from Iowa State University. So join me in welcoming Leo.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Charles. And thanks, Jenna Lee, for her help with the exhibit. That broadside that's on the back of Iowa Heritage Illustrated is the advertisement from the Des Moines Register that was for the Film State Fair, the 1945 version that premiered in Des Moines. And we needed a graphic really quick. And I emailed Jenna Lee and said, hey, do you have that in any format? And she got it over to us in Des Moines in a couple of days. And so that graphic also appears in the exhibit. But want to talk about the exhibit a little bit. Last year, my colleagues who are in the State Historic Preservation Office, Paula Moore and Ralph Christian, talked about the architectural heritage of theaters in Iowa, going back to opera houses. They did that program here as a History for Lunch discussion. And that was what started part of our conversations about doing an exhibit about Iowans' relationship with Hollywood, was the work out of the State Historic Preservation Office. But the exhibit brought in people like Marty Knepper, who did the piece that Mary just referenced, and also we had an advisory board with Marty and some others to help shape the exhibit. So when we do an exhibit in the Des Moines Museum, we'll usually bring in other advisors. It's not just my vision or anyone else's. There are a lot of people, as I said, people like Jenna Lee behind the scenes, Mary and Charles with the collections here in Iowa City that contribute to the production we create in Des Moines. So I invite you all to come over. It premiered in June of this year and will be open at least for 3 years. And the three kind of legs of the exhibit are Iowans as portrayed in films. Then we feature 18 Iowa actors in the exhibit and Iowa theaters. And I'll just skim over that Iowa theater section since Paula and Ralph did their talk last year. And the way the exhibit is laid out is in those three sections. So on the north side of the gallery where you see the three kind of rectangles at the top of that image, those are the actor cases. Then along the far north wall are the theater treatments. And again, we're in Des Moines, but we recognize we are telling the story of the whole state. So we'll talk about that just briefly. And then on the south edge of the gallery are the Iowa films. And with that advisory committee, we brainstormed out as many Iowa films, and Marty was there for that meeting. And then we said, okay, let's rank our top 5 and what films most depict Iowans and Iowa. So I'll start off by just saying, name the kind of iconic films that depict Iowa and Iowans. Anybody? Music Man, thank you, okay. State Fair, Field of Dreams. Any others? Bridges of Madison County, thank you. Any others? We've named 4 of the 5 that we selected to pick. State Fair, we'll get into that into a minute, but the other one that we talk about then is Norman Lear's Cold Turkey. And so we'll talk about why we chose those films as we go through the talk, but those are the 5 films we featured, and I will briefly touch on the 18 actors, and we can have a quick conversation at the end too about why we didn't choose somebody if you have any concerns. So, setting the stage, when we talked about Hollywood and the Heartland, we knew that Iowa communities were engaging in popular entertainment before film was developed, so we wanted to give a little bit of treatment to that, and that opera houses in places like Iowa City or Davenport or Dubuque or Sioux City were built to hold sometimes over 1,000 people, so that opera house heritage actually kind of set the stage for what then becomes the movie heritage of Iowa and the built environment. So in that section where we set the stage and early films, we talk about the Cherry Sisters, even though they never had any screen appearances, but they're a well-known Iowa performing group. We also then reference kind of the national topics that people should be aware of. So like The Great Train Robbery is the first film that really has a plot to it. It's not like the early Edison films of the 1890s that are kittens boxing or a blacksmith or a woman dancing. The Great Train Robbery is really regarded in 1904 as the first film to have a real plot to it. In the silent era. We also reference other films like The Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith that talk about issues in American culture that are happening, and Des Moines City Council actually tried to ban the showing of Birth of a Nation in Des Moines because they were afraid that it might create race riots in Des Moines. Some African-American ministers in Sioux City were concerned about the way blacks were portrayed in that film, and so they tried to get some scenes edited out of it. Eventually it's shown in most communities, larger communities across the state. So we kind of put that context around things leading up to a film called The Wonderful Thing, which is stars Norma Talmadge, a well-known silent era actress. And as an actor, she not only is in the film, but she also kind of leads the direction, and it's filmed largely in Centerville, Iowa. The plot is this Midwestern farm girl, daughter of a hog farmer, who goes to a finishing school, is well-educated, goes to England. The New York Times critic largely panned it, didn't say that it was some of Norma Talmadge's best work, but that's really the first film that has national exposure, and it has a number of scenes filmed in Iowa. Is The Wonderful Thing, filmed in 1919, premieres in 1921, and that's mostly Centerville. I've never seen it, to be honest. The Appanoose County Historical Society made a print of it from the Smithsonian, converted to DVD. It's in actually not Smithsonian, Library of Congress. And so Appanoose County Historical Society in Centerville sometimes shows The Wonderful Thing, and I've been trying to get down there just to get a private viewing. So that's one I'm still looking to see, but I know the backstory on it well enough. So Cherry Sisters, Great Train Robbery. There's a lobby card, an advertising card for The Wonderful Thing starring Norma Talmadge with the different things that we just talked about. So first iconic Iowa film that we chose to address based on the conversations with our board of advisors was State Fair. And Phil Stong from Keosauqua writes the book in 1932. He grew up in Keosauqua, comes to Des Moines, goes to Drake High School. The book is actually a little more risque than the films are. I don't know if anybody's read it, but in the film, the son and daughter, and this is how we bring it into the kind of depicting larger historical themes, is it's written in 1932, produced as a movie in 1933. You're on the heels of the Jazz Age, World War I. There'd been the Country Life Commission in the 1908 that had talked about what's happening with rural America even then. And so you're getting these issues played out in State Fair where you've got a son and daughter who are trying to figure out, are they going to stay on the farm or are they going to leave the farm and go to the big city? And so you've got that urban-rural dilemma going on in State Fair. Phil Stong actually addresses some morality issues in the book. In the book, the son and daughter don't just date people and have romantic experiences. They have slightly more involved romantic experiences at the State Fair. And you can use your imagination as deep as you want, and you're probably accurate, at least, to the level of relationship that the children have. So the 1933 version stars Will Rogers as Abel Frake. Janet Gaynor, who's the woman as you're looking on the left, is the daughter, Margie Frake, and then there's Melissa Frake, the mother, and Wayne, the son. The other kind of fun parts that many people know about this film is, Melissa, the mother, wants to win a pickling contest and also a mincemeat contest. And will she use alcohol in her mincemeat. And so you've got the whole kind of prohibition, temperance, anti-alcohol theme as an underlying theme that's part of American culture at this time too. So it's, and Iowa as the middle of the Midwest is a really good vehicle to be the setting. Also the fact that Phil Stong is an Iowan. He had a relative who was an administrator with the state fair in Des Moines. So he knew his subject, and he's an Iowan. And part of what Marty Knepper says is we've got good writers oftentimes, and that's why we get good films that come out of Iowa. So Phil Stong kind of sets that trend with State Fair. There's then the 1945 version, which is the musical by Rodgers and Hammerstein. One of the unique things about that is that Rodgers and Hammerstein usually took their productions first to the stage, and then they went to film. And this one goes directly to film. So the 1945 version, Charles Winninger is the dad, Abel Frake in that one. You've got, I'm trying to think, I'm blanking on who plays Wayne, but it really has some of those iconic songs that still deal with some of those rural, urban issues. And in this version, the daughter, Margie, she goes and marries the reporter from the Des Moines Register. It turns out Phil Stong had worked for the Register at one time too, so he writes what he knows. So the girl marries the Des Moines Register reporter who's being taken to Chicago, so Margie's going to get to be in Chicago, and then Wayne, the son, he gets to decide that maybe that theater performer at the state fair, the stage performer, the singer that he falls in love with, isn't the best fit for him, and he stays local. So you get the best of both worlds. One child goes to the urban allure, and one child stays home. And it does premiere just about 2 weeks after the bombs are dropped on Japan, so it has a huge world premiere in Des Moines in 1945 and then plays very well all across the country. So those are some of the kind of broader historical themes that show up in State Fair. And then the other one that we came up very quickly was Music Man by Meredith Willson, a native of Mason City. Again, an Iowa-born writer, but also really a talented musician. Goes to the Juilliard School and plays in New York as a musician, but then starts, creating stage productions. And so Music Man tells the story of Harold Hill and Marion Peru. Harold being the traveling salesman who comes to small town Iowa, even though I think the line is from the opening, one of the opening scenes. Hill would never go to Iowa. He could never fool those bow-necked Hawkeyes, is the line that Wilson writes. And so Harold Hill comes to River City. Wilson patterns that off of his experiences in Mason City, Iowa, where he grew up. And Hill's whole conceit, as most people know, is that he's selling band instruments and uniforms, but he doesn't know a thing about music. So he then skips town, and Marion Peru is the town librarian who's bringing in things like Balzac books or the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam to pollute the minds of the young children of River City. And so you've got kind of these two outsiders, though Marion is local, but she's bringing in new ideas, and how new ideas are received in small town Iowa and how outsiders are affected by Iowa. And turns out that, Marion figures out that Harold is a shyster and yet falls in love with him, and so protects him. And then in the end, the boys' band that he creates really does come together. The method of teaching that Hill uses is what? The think, yes, the think system. If you just da 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 da, if you just think about the music, you'll learn it. So that's the system that he's proposing for his students in the boys' band. And one of the things that we're doing as a promotion for this exhibit is the first Saturday of every month we'll show a film related to Iowa or an Iowa actor. And so just last Saturday we played Music Man at the State Museum. Cold Turkey we referenced. It's Norman Lear's real only Hollywood film effort that he does. And the concept of Cold Turkey is that Bob Newhart, playing the tobacco ad man, says, everybody remembers Alfred Nobel not for inventing dynamite or TNT, but for creating the Peace Prize. So this is made in 1969, released in 1971, features the town of Eagle Rock, Iowa, another fictional town, and will put a challenge out, and any community in the United States that can accept giving up smoking for 30 days will win a $25 million prize. That's how we'll ingratiate our tobacco company to the American people. We'll help save a town by giving them a $25 million prize if everybody pledges to give up smoking for 30 days. It stars Dick Van Dyke as a town minister. Jean Stapleton plays the mayor's wife. Pippa Scott is the other female lead. She's Dick Van Dyke's wife in the film. And it really is addressing some of those middle America issues that were being brought up by President Nixon at the time, and the idea of a silent majority in middle America and what the American people really were thinking and doing. And so they poke fun at the John Birch Society. Norman Lear, with his political slant, really takes on some of those themes in American culture that are under challenged by a new generation with religion, politics, the military-industrial complex. And it's a bit of a campy film, but it really is a great piece for its time. And again, Iowa as a vehicle to depict middle America is why it's set here. The writers on this one were actually New York writers. It's never published as a book. It was a screenplay that Lear picked up and adapted. It's filmed mostly in Adair in Greenfield County in west central Iowa, in Winterset for a lot of town square scenes, and then also in Des Moines. And the scene filmed in Des Moines, it's 1969 now, and they needed a building to depict the home of the tobacco company's owner. So they needed a mansion for the tobacco company owner's home. And what Norman Lear selects is a house that's on Grand in Des Moines. And so the opening scene is this Confederate flag flying on a building, and it pans down, and I'm saying, that's Terrace Hill. That's the Confederate flag on our governor's house. That's Terrace Hill with a Confederate flag flying on it. It was a private home owned by the Hubbles at the time. But if anybody ever asks you, has the Confederate flag ever flown on the governor of Iowa's home? The answer is yes. So that's the very opening scene, is the Confederate battle flag flying on Terrace Hill, with Dick Van Dyke, or with Bob Newhart then being the tobacco pitch man, talking to the head of the Valiant Tobacco Company, saying, here's what we're going to do. So again, bringing in some of those themes of American culture in the 1960s and 70s that are being challenged, and Iowa representing those ideals in the film. Then it does change a little bit in the 80s, and this is one of the things that Marty Knepper and John Lawrence write about, is whereas Iowa's being used as a setting to talk about cultural issues and social issues, the 80s and 90s film really talk as much. Field of Dreams a little bit does the farm crisis to a degree. Not like Country, which again is filmed in Iowa, has an Iowa basis, but Field of Dreams is more about the Iowa landscape. And filmed in Dyersville in 1988, which across the state was a terribly, terribly dry year. So the producers and the crew had to water the cornfield to keep it looking green. And you get, again, that connection to an Iowa writer with W.P. Kinsella, who's from Western Canada, and really had never heard of, he'd heard of Iowa, but hadn't set foot in Iowa till he comes here to Iowa City and participates in the Iowa Writers Workshop. And I've not spoken to him, but I've heard him talk and read what he's written about his experiences, and he did. He fell in love with Iowa while he was here, and so he writes the book Shoeless Joe, based on some short stories he writes while he's in the Writers Workshop, and continues that legacy of great writers who have a connection to Iowa, just like Stong and Wilson, and carries it into Field of Dreams, which may be the most iconic of at least Iowa films that reflects our landscape in the way that people don't always recognize, especially for outsiders, just how beautiful our landscape is and the kind of magical character of the Iowa land. And that's one of those themes that does come out in the 80s and 90s with the last two films. One of the things we do in the exhibit is each film has a little featurette film where we asked Marty to address some of these themes. So you may not get what we're talking about today in a label, but it'll be Marty in a video touch with a clip perhaps preceding her discussing what those themes are in each film. So I'm really borrowing from Marty's scholarship and John's scholarship on what we addressed in the exhibit. And that's how all our projects are. They're very collaborative. And then Bridges of Madison County, again, written by an Iowan, Robert James Waller, who grew up in Rockford, just outside Mason City. I think it's technically Floyd County. In fact, I know it is. And so between Mason City and Charles City. And he goes to University of Northern Iowa for his bachelor's degree, then gets his PhD, comes back to UNI, and writes a very male-focused novella about Robert Kincaid and his experiences with an Iowa farm wife who's a transplant from Italy. And Clint Eastwood picks up on the popularity of the novella or the short novel and turns it on its head to a degree and focuses more on the character of Francesca Johnson, the Italian-born farm wife who meets a Iowa soldier and then comes to Iowa and starts raising a family. And so the premise, as most of you probably know, it's a 4-day relationship between the photographer and the farm wife. And it really reflects, again, as much the beauty of the Iowa landscape, but I think it also reinforces some what we consider Iowa values, even if they don't always hold the day in real life, where Francesca, given the choice between leaving her family and following what may be her true muse and Robert, or staying with her family in Madison County on the farm, she chooses her family and the farm and kind of puts back her dreams. And so some of those themes that relate to feminism and issues of gender roles come out in this film, but also the kind of beauty of the Iowa landscape is also well depicted. And so those are the 5 films. We wrap up just talking about some of the other issues in Iowa filmmaking, and we chose films. They didn't have to be made in Iowa. Like Music Man is not made in Iowa, but they had to depict Iowans and Iowa. So sometimes people will say, well, what about the film Twister? It's like, well, it was made here in the state, but it wasn't about Iowans and Iowa. So we talk about the filmmaking in the 80s and 90s with the film office, and even touch on the tax credits of the 2007 to 2009 era and what happened with the film office then and the abuse of the tax credits that took place. So we try not to, sugarcoat anything, but we really wanted to focus on those films that culturally depicted Iowans in Iowa. And most of them did at least get some scenes filmed in the state. State Fair, the musical did not get a lot of scenes, whereas the Will Rogers did have some scenes filmed here in the state. So then we had to come up with Iowa actors. And so some of these names you'll recognize easily, like John Wayne. That may be Raymond Hatt and William Frawley are fairly well known. Lillian Russell was really kind of one of those bridge performers where she was largely a stage performer rather than a film performer, but she does have a couple of film credits. And so she's from Clinton, Iowa, and was known as the most beautiful woman in the world. They made trade cards for her promoting products in the late 1880s and 1890s into the early 20th century. There's actually a film done in the 1930s called The Lillian Russell Story, and she's born in Clinton. So that's why we chose Lillian. There she is, the most beautiful woman in the world. And then, as I said, John Wayne from Winterset. He's one of those Iowans who is born here, but moves out of the state by the time he's 6 years old. So we claim him. How much Iowa shaped his character. He didn't always think of the state while he was in Hollywood, but he was supportive of the John Wayne birthplace that's in Winterset. And Brian Downs, who's their administrator, was on our advisory committee and was very helpful. So if you get a chance, go to the John Wayne birthplace. They're building a new museum there in Winterset and should be open later this year or early next year. And I don't think I need to tell you any more about him. Raymond Hatton had mostly supporting roles, but he had more than 100 screen credits, and he would receive at least second billing on posters and films. He did a lot of Westerns. He's from Red Oak, Iowa. And if you're looking at late 20s, early 30s, into the 40s, and into the 50s to some degree, Westerns, Raymond Hatton is one of those kind of quintessential Western supporting actors. So he's from Red Oak. Then William Frawley from Burlington, a lot of folks think of from I Love Lucy, or perhaps My Three Sons, where he has a few seasons as Uncle Charlie. He's Fred Mertz in I Love Lucy. But he's one of those performers who starts in vaudeville because he has a marvelous singing voice. He started singing in Burlington at the Catholic church that he grew up in Burlington, and got bit by the performing bug, so he joins some vaudeville productions. And then as Hollywood transitions to talking and performing films after 1927, William Frawley, again, mainly a supporting actor, but dozens of screen roles as a supporting actor, so fairly well known. Conrad Nagel's a great story that not a lot of us know. Some folks in the audience may know his name. He's born in Keokuk, moves to Des Moines when his father takes a position at what was then Highland Park College. Eventually, the pharmacy becomes Drake's Pharmacy School. And he's one of those Iowans who must be really well liked, because when Louis Mayer creates or is proposing the idea of the Academy for Motion Picture Arts and Performing Arts and Sciences, the actor that he invites to the first dinner to propose the idea is Conrad Nagel, who starts in silent film and then goes to talking. And so when Louis Mayer needs somebody to sell the rest of the actors on creating the Academy, Conrad Nagel is the guy who does that. And so he's a quality actor, but also just a nice Iowa guy who must be well liked in Hollywood. So then when he becomes the host with Bob Hope, once the Academy Awards are broadcast on television, 1950 and 51, I think, are the first years that they're broadcast. He and Bob Hope are the hosts of the television broadcast. He gets an Academy Award. There are 3 Iowans who win Academy Awards for acting. I'll ask you after I tell you his story. He's not one of them. He gets his because he supports retired actors. And so in 1940, the Academy gives him an honorary actor for his support of retired actors. So again, very altruistic, good Iowa guy who a lot of folks have forgotten, and is a quality actor and just an all-around good human being. So who are the 3 Iowa actors that have won Academy Awards for acting roles? Donna Reed, thank you. What film? No, it's not Wonderful Life. From Here to Eternity. From Here to Eternity. She plays, again, a character who's not necessarily, she's a very nice character, but she makes her money in interesting ways. Gene Seberg is a fabulous actor, but never wins an Academy Award. John Wayne, for True Grit, and the other... It's not Hope Emerson. She's nominated. So let's talk about Hope, and I just heard it. Hope Emerson is another actor that a lot of Iowans have forgotten. She's from Haywarden, up in the northwest part of the state. She's born in 1897. She's 6'2". She weighs as much as 225 pounds in her life. But she's fabulously talented. She's in vaudeville and does a piano act with her mother. Josephine's her mother. And in 1950, she plays in a couple of film noir pieces, one called Caged in 1950. And so she's nominated for a Best Supporting Role in the film Caged. And she often gets typecast in films. She goes on to do TV. She does Peter Gunn and the Dennis O'Keefe Show. And she sometimes chafes at the way she is typecast. So she played a character called Mother on Peter Gunn, who was this club owner and kind of a scowly, meanish character. And that's not really her personality. And so she leaves the Peter Gunn show, goes to Dennis O'Keefe, and she dies fairly young. She dies in 1960. But she is a talented person. And so in 1950, she's nominated for an Academy Award. So she's one of the Iowans nominated, but she doesn't get it for Caged. So that's our early group. And then the second group, they get a little cut off. You're not seeing all 3 of the Lane sisters from Indianola. You're only seeing 2 of them. There were actually 4. And it was Leota, Rosemary, Priscilla, and Lola. And the two oldest were born in Indiana, and then the two younger are born in Indianola, and their father's at Simpson College. And so they actually have some real talent, too. They're singers as well as actors. Priscilla's best known for being with Gregory Peck in Arsenic and Old Lace. She's the female lead in Arsenic and Old Lace. That's Priscilla, who's closest to the man in the photo, and that's Rosemary, who's next to her. So I didn't mean to crowd out Lodela, the other one who often gets cast in films. They're in films through the 40s and early 50s, and then kind of lose their studio appeal. But again, some significant leading and supporting screen roles from the Lane sisters. They do films called Daughters Courageous and then Wives Courageous. So they're fairly well known. Again, one of those Iowans who's only here for a while, but he's born in Woolstock, so just south of Mason City, about 40, 50 miles. He's in both From Here to Eternity and gets his major start in Gone with the Wind as supporting role, very brief supporting role, but has at least screen credit in both those films. When they screen test From Here to Eternity, they find that people say, hey, there's Superman. And so his role in From Here to Eternity actually gets almost entirely cut out. And so most people do know him from his TV work as Superman, but he had some fairly significant roles in film. And then Donna Mich is the one not born in Iowa, Iowan that we claimed for this exhibit. He comes to Marion to go to St. Birchman's Catholic Academy. They don't call it a Catholic Academy then. They just call it St. Birchman's Academy. He's born in Wisconsin. And he then goes to what becomes Loras College today and falls in love with a girl from Dubuque, marries a Dubuque girl. And so when he goes to Hollywood and has his career and then finally passes away in the 1990s, he's buried in Dubuque, or his ashes are interred in Dubuque, because his wife is interred in Dubuque. So even though he's not born in Iowa, he comes to Marion when he's about 12 or 13 years old. So we claimed Donna Mich as an Iowan because of his time in the state. And then the last three are the kind of big three women of Iowa acting. And we talked about Donna Reed. Most people know her for It's a Wonderful Life. She wins her Academy Award for From Here to Eternity. And from Denison, so the western part of the state, farm girl, kind of that quintessential wholesome Iowa character. But in From Here to Eternity, she plays a lady of the evening. And that's what she gets her role for, or her Academy Award for. And just as a sidebar, so her daughter, Mary, will be talking in December at the museum on a Saturday. Mary Owen is her name. And we're doing a Donna double where the first Saturday of December we'll have It's a Wonderful Life as our afternoon matinee, and then an evening showing of From Here to Eternity for an older audience. That, not that it's that risque, but a little more complex film than It's a Wonderful Life. So if you have a free first Saturday of December, come over to Des Moines for the weekend, and Mary Owen, Donna's daughter, will be talking. We'll also have on loan to us from the Crawford County Historical Society, Donna Reed's Academy Award. So her Oscar will be at the museum beginning November 3rd through early May, and then when the Crawford County Historical Museum opens back up for its season, we'll send it back to its home, but they've been nice enough at Crawford County to loan us Donna Reed's Academy Award. So that's one Academy Award winner, and I think it might have been Mary and Cloris is a little washed out. This is a very young Cloris Leachman photo that's in the collections here in Iowa City. Actually, that promotional shot and I think the Donna Mich shot are also from the collections here in Iowa City. And this is a very young Cloris Leachman when she was in Des Moines, and she does some local stage production acting in Des Moines, then goes to Hollywood, does TV and film, but a lot of people think of her from her roles in a couple of Mel Brooks films. Young Frankenstein she's in, and she's also in a film that spoofs it's called High Anxiety. Vertigo. It spoofs Vertigo a little bit and Hitchcock films in general. So she's in both of those Mel Brooks films, has a very long career in TV as well. And she's been a real peach on this exhibit, she's loaned us her Academy Award for the run of the exhibit. So you can always see one Academy Award at Hollywood in the Heartland. Cloris Leachman's is in the case of the actor cases talking about her. And then we mentioned Jean Seberg from Marshalltown, really one of those tragic American stories. And I mean that in the way that our federal government treated her. Tragic for her life, but also one of the darker, kind of parts of American history. She comes onto the scene in 1958, I believe is the year that St. Joan is released. Otto Preminger has done a national search looking for a star to be in his film on Joan of Arc. And Jean Seberg from Marshalltown, Iowa is selected. And so she starts in 2 Otto Preminger films. She doesn't get very good press from those. It's like, who's this upstart from Iowa trying to be in these Hollywood films? And some of the filming is done in Paris. She falls in love with life in France. She stays in France. She does some very exceptional work in France, a film called Reckless that's done in 1962, I believe. And so she has an international reputation, but the French love her. And so she's kind of resurrected as a leading character in Hollywood films. And then in the late 60s, when she's still doing work, she becomes supportive of civil rights and the Black Panthers in the LA area. And our federal government and the FBI isn't keen on the activities of the Black Panthers, and so they literally start planting stories in the Hollywood press about her. And she's pregnant with a child that the FBI says to a Hollywood reporter, well, we've got information that the child she's carrying is not her husband's. It's actually the child of a Black Panther that she's had a relationship with. And that might be interesting to people. And so this gets published about her, and she's viewed as kind of erratic and unstable. And it really destroys her career as they start spreading these lies about her, because she miscarries the child that she's carrying. It's not a mixed race child, not that would be an issue, but it certainly was something that people thought differently about back in the early 1970s. And so our federal government tears her apart, destroys her mental health to a degree, and ruins her career. And after that, her ability to get work is devastated, and she really doesn't do much after 1975. She goes back and she's living in Paris again, and she's found dead in her car, likely from suicide in 1979. And her family and also then the Orpheum Theater in Marshalltown have some good collections. Her family donated some things to the State Museum. So we've got her script from Paint Your Wagon that she signed. She was in that with Lee Marvin and Clint Eastwood. So we've got her script. And then her brother donated a portrait of her done late in her time at Marshalltown High School. And so we've got that from our collection. And then St. Joan premiered in Marshalltown. So the Orpheum Theater in Marshalltown, which it still shows film, does a lot of other cultural activities. They loaned us some things too related to her career, including her high school acting book that she signed. So really great Iowan who had her life destroyed by our federal government. Our third group is then the kind of contemporary gang, and Tom Arnold was a real help on this exhibit too. He first reacted by saying, okay, I understand John Wayne, I understand Donna Reed, but really, you want to talk about me in this exhibit? Well, he gets really exceptional reviews in True Lies, which is produced by James Cameron and stars Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis. And he comes in for the opening of the exhibit and actually did a really great talk in Des Moines for about 150 people in the auditorium, and told some really good stories. One of his perspectives was he probably took on too much work and was taking any script that was offered to him. And if he had been a little more selective, but he just likes to do stuff. So he doesn't say no very often. And we were grateful for that, because he didn't say no to us when we asked him to come in for the opening of the exhibit. And one of the he loaned some photos. His first screen credit is in a film with Dustin Hoffman. So he had a photo of him and Dustin in the bar scene where Tom's a bartender. He's from Ottumwa, goes to school here at University of Iowa. And he also then talked to James Cameron and said, hey, James, any chance you can get a copy of the script to True Lies? for the museum in Des Moines to put in the exhibit. And so he said, I'd like to sign it and send it to him. And so James Cameron gets it, signs it, and Tom's still friends with Arnold Schwarzenegger. So then James Cameron sends it to Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then it goes back to Tom. And so Tom went to the trouble to get James Cameron an Academy Award winning director, and then Arnold Schwarzenegger to sign the script too. So we really appreciated Tom's help. Ron Livingston is from Marion, Cedar Rapids area. Most people know him from a film that he did with Jennifer Aniston called Office Space in the 90s. And he's also done Band of Brothers and some other film work. Band of Brothers is TV, but Office Space, he was the lead and is well known for that. Then one name on this group that some people don't recognize is Michelle Monahan. She's from Winthrop, just off Highway 20 in eastern Iowa, northeast Iowa. And she's actually become a fairly significant A-list actor and is doing some really good work. She's just fairly new, and so people don't always recognize her name. But she had supporting roles up till about 2 years ago. Now she's getting some fairly significant leading roles. Then Ashton Kutcher was also helpful. Tom told a story, and some of you may have heard this before, but Tom told us a story where he was in a bar once here in Iowa City, and supposedly some kid actor came up to him, or some kid who had dreams, and Tom said, just be a good Iowan, work hard, show up on time. Those are like the two biggest things, and then just be yourself. And turned out that was Ashton Kutcher. And so Ashton then went up to him in Hollywood in the last 5 years and said, hey, just want to let you know, you were really helpful to me when I was in Iowa City, and I saw you and knew what you'd done, and you gave me some good advice on being an actor. And Ashton Kutcher, again, mostly known for his comedic roles, has done things like Jobs last year, where he played in the biopic about Steve Jobs. But Ashton was helpful. He won for a film called No Strings Attached, the 2011 Best Actor Award from the Teen Choice Awards. And that award is a large surfboard, about 5.5 feet tall. And so Ashton has loaned us his Teen Choice surfboard award, so that's in the exhibit. Brandon Routh is from Norwalk in central Iowa. I'm skipping people. So there's Ron Livingston, if you didn't know what he looked like. There's Michelle Monahan, Ashton, and then Brandon Routh plays Superman in the film Superman Returns. He actually gets really good reviews, but the plot is a little plotting for most action film folks, and so the film doesn't get good reviews, and it almost, kind of puts Brandon in a bad spot. He's still getting film and mostly TV roles, but still is acting out in Hollywood, and having two Supermen from Iowa, we knew we wanted to include him, and his parents and Brandon were very helpful too. So turns out, as a toddler, like a lot of us boys and maybe some young women, he had a Superman pair of pajamas, and his parents still had the cape that went to that pair of pajamas. So we've got Brandon Routh's cape from when he was about 2 years old in the exhibit as well. And again, the Rouths were very helpful. And then the last one, a lot of people know, Elijah Wood playing Frodo Baggins. He grows up in Cedar Rapids and leaves Cedar Rapids when he's about 7.5, 8 years old, goes out to Hollywood, plays in Back to the Future 2 as a child actor, has a role in a Paula Abdul video, and then gets more and more screen roles, and best known as Frodo Baggins in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So Frodo and two Supermen, the ring bearer and two Supermen are from Iowa, and some great women actors too. Mary Bailey, so that's some of our acting, and that's the 18 we chose. So I'm going to go through the theater section really quick, and then I'll open it up to questions. We wanted to be geographically diverse in everything that we do with the exhibit. So when we talk, and we actually can swap these out. So if somebody were to say, oh, you ought to do a treatment on the Englert, and you had around $500, we might be able to swap out Davenport and put in Iowa City. So the big towns that we feature, at least in the kind of early and movie palace days, are Dubuque, Sioux City, Davenport, and Cedar Rapids. Then there's a well-known set of architects from Des Moines who really shaped the Iowa landscape with their work, Wetherell and Harrison. And so they do these 1930s, 40s, early 50s theaters like the Charles in Charles City that has this really colorful facade on it with some tiling of blue and orange and gold. And so they're really great architects. Are the Malik in Independence, Iowa, and they do theaters all across the state. So we talk about them a little bit. Then we also talk about small town theaters like the Rialto in Missouri Valley. I know Tipton's a county seat, and it's a little bigger town, but we put it into the and I know the Hardacre isn't currently open either, but they're still doing the film festival, and they still are keeping things going while they're under restoration. So address that. And then we also talk about architectural styles as they change in the 1950s and 60s. So, and also adaptive reuse. The Sioux and Sioux Rapids, it's actually Sioux Center. I need to change that slide. It is the County Historical Museum. So it was the theater. It still has the theater set up, and that's how that one. And the Fox has been open and closed at different times in Fort Madison. I think it's currently closed from when I last checked. But those are kind of showing the architectural styles changing across the state. And then we also wanted to talk about theaters after 1960, and the two really good examples that we had close by were the Plaza in Des Moines. There's also a Plaza in Cedar Rapids, same company. So if you ever went to the Plaza in Cedar Rapids, the Plaza in Des Moines, which is on the right as you're looking at it, that's the theater I started going to. My mom didn't get her driver's license till I was about 7 years old, and I was the youngest of 6. So my mom would call a taxi cab to pick us up in Clive, Iowa, and have them take us to the Merle Hay Plaza to go see Disney movies and things. And so that's like my nostalgia first theater, but it's a good example of a mid-1960s theater and theaters moving out of the central part of the city and out to the suburbs and towns. And that's the same with the Fleur in Des Moines, which the Plaza in Cedar Rapids and Des Moines opened about 1967. The Fleur was about 1968. And it was one of those multiplexes even when it first opened. It was the Fleur 4. So a good example of moving out of the center of the city and being a multiplex theater, not like we have multiplexes today with stadium seating, but having multiple screens. And so that was why we chose those two. And then the exhibit, as I said, it opened on June 27th. That gives you a little bit of flavor of the exhibit. One of the other kind of fun claims to Iowa film legacy, and then I'll wrap up, that you're seeing here. There's two that I'll touch on. Little tough to see, but this panel here, and there's a book right over here that you can't see. The very first film that's an all-black made film was made by a man named Oscar Mich. And he's born in Illinois, farms after the Civil War in South Dakota, but he goes to Sioux City and he writes a book called The Homesteader and publishes it in Sioux City. And that becomes the first black feature film ever made. The book is written in 1917. I think 1919 is the date of the film. There aren't any prints of it that anybody's found so far. So nobody alive probably has seen this film. But Iowa has a small claim to the very first all-black film with Oscar Mich, who was a Sioux City resident at the time. Then a lot of people know the Sound of Music scene with the Lonely Goat Herd piece. Bill Baird, and Meredith Wilson from Mason City has 2 L's in Wilson. Bill Baird from Mason City only has 1 L in Bill, so I don't know if like Bill lost an L to Meredith or what happened. But Bill Baird grows up in Mason City and does the marionettes. Those marionettes are owned by the Charles H. McNider Museum in Mason City. They were kind enough to loan us the Lonely Goat Herd and the Girl Goat marionettes from Sound of Music. And they'll be in the exhibit for at least a year and a half, and then I'll need to talk about perhaps either renewing the loan or swapping in a couple other of the marionettes from Sound of Music. And so we sprinkle in some of those other kind of Iowans through the exhibit where Iowa touches, and then that's an example of the actor case. So you can't quite see it, but right there is Cloris Leachman's Academy Award, and Donna Reed sits next to it when we have it. So that's an example of the actor cases, and I usually start with this, but I'll finish with it today. It really is an honor to be your employee. We take that very seriously, that we're state employees and we work for you. And if you ever have any questions, we try to be as responsive as we can. Our website is iowahistory.org. My email address is leo.landis@iowa.gov. Museum hours are Monday through Saturday, 9 to 4:30, Sunday, noon to 4:30. So if you ever want to make a trip, we're open every day, but state holidays, and some federal holidays we're open, but state holidays we're always closed. So if it's state holiday, don't come see us. And again, I'd be happy to answer any questions, talk about anything with the exhibit, or why didn't we include so-and-so. And so thank you very much for your time, and it's an honor to be your employee. Go ahead. Yeah, Mary has a microphone that we'll pass around if you have a question.
I was just wondering whether any research has ever been done on world premieres here in the state of Iowa.
I know Marty Knepper will know everyone that's been done. Do I get the film right? Was it 16 to Life that premieres here in Iowa City? That's a recent one. It was like 7 years ago. And it premiered at the Englert at a film festival. Fairly well-liked contemporary film. Young adult oriented, but Marty will know them, but I don't think anybody's ever done like a historical or a academic look at world premieres in Iowa. Because Music Man has its world premiere in Mason City, yeah. And Cold Turkey has its world premiere in Des Moines. I know the 45 state premiere or world premieres in Des Moines. Field of Dreams premieres in Dyersville. So all those, and I don't know if they screened Bridges anywhere before Winterset or not. That I should know that, but I don't. So but there are others, like I said, 16 to Life, which is a fairly well-regarded film, gets its premiere here. Get the mic over to him, yeah.
Did you have a discussion about what's eating Gilbert Grape? And what was that discussion?
That's maybe one of the 5 stories that I wish we had brought Peter Hedges in as somebody we talked about. And I think Peter, he lives in Brooklyn or in New York City. I don't know him personally. I'd love to have him come in and talk about that film. It's not one we included, but it's certainly worthy of discussion. Yeah. And I know that again, he's a West Des Moines native, so he's a little bit older than me, but like our childhoods are somewhat parallel. So I have a fondness for that book and his work, and he's certainly one of those great solid Iowa writers who we talk about Max Alan Collins a little bit, and Jane Smiley in an Iowa Writers Workshop case. I can't remember where Peter did his work. I don't think it was here in Iowa City. So we couldn't bring him in that way, and it was one of those stories that just didn't make the cut, but it's a good one.
I just comment that for the last 5-10 years, the Des Moines Register, I believe the writer's name is Tom Logston, has been compiling an entire database of not only actors, but people who were producers and agents, and there's hundreds of names in there, and he gives a really strong biographical history of each person and their place in the film industry. So I encourage you to go out and look for that.
Yeah, and I think Tom has this one on there. It's another story that we are trying to figure out how to include. Ron Clements from Sioux City is a Disney animator who pitches Little Mermaid and Aladdin as stories to Disney, and then becomes the director. And so it's an Iowan who's really instrumental behind those 2 great Disney animated films. And he's not in the exhibit right now. And so that's one of those stories, trying to figure out how we might bring him in too. And he's on the database that the Register has. Hope Emerson's on there. That was one way we came across her. And there's other websites too, but the Register site is great.
Well, we could play that game all day. Mary Beth Hirth, Annabeth. Yeah.
A lot of movies over the years have used Iowa to create a character. So if you want to easily and quickly convey that somebody is good but naive, innocent, you say they're from Iowa, like Radar O'Reilly and MASH is a good example. I wondered if you did anything with that, looking at characters who were supposed to be from Iowa.
Yeah, we're a little more subtle maybe we're subtle about the way we make a lot of our points in this exhibit just because it does cover a lot of territory. But that's one of the points that Marty makes in the video pieces, is that Iowa really is a kind of shorthand way of depicting that kind of character. And that's one of those transitions that happens in the late 80s, early 90s, as that starts to fall away a little bit, and that Iowans start getting depicted more and more like other people in the United States. Whether that's for good or ill. Yeah. I mean, it still happens, but as Mary mentioned, I mean, Marty has, and so we had those conversations. Again, I don't know that we address it real in depth in the exhibit, but it's certainly something that we were aware of. And you're right, and Radar is really based on a real character, not for this exhibit, but for something else I was researching. And then Gary Berghoff kind of takes him in a whole different direction in the film, or in the TV series. But in the film and in the book, there really was a character based on an Ottumwa native from, I don't know, I can't recall who wrote MASH, but that was a real Iowan who inspired that character in the book.
Thanks.
Anything else? Yeah, Mary Beth Hurt was one of those that we talked about, but just not enough leading roles or even major supporting roles. And usually we get asked about Kate Mulgrew, too, who's done a lot of great TV work, but her film work just isn't there. So usually I can just say they really didn't do much film, whereas Mary Beth Hurt has had some film work, but maybe not as major as what we thought. And we vetted that group through our committee, too, to select who we selected.
Well, back in the 1960s, William J. Peterson collected a bunch of 8x10 Hollywood stills. And what you see in looking at that collection is that, unbeknownst to us, many, many character actors, people who are behind the scenes or playing what you think are extras, if we could put a character generation on the screen, it would say, Iowan. They're just absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
So thanks for shedding light on this, Leo, and for coming over today. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Watching City Channel 4 on TV, online, on demand, on Facebook, and now on the go on your mobile device.
Thing that I really like to do in the area is go to University of Iowa athletic events. We're a Big Ten university, so our football games and our basketball games are really big, and that's a lot of fun to do.
We have a lot of fun going to those games. The atmosphere is just electric around here on game days.
Well, of course, the sporting activities through the university are great. Cedar Rapids has semi-pro events. There's a children's museum in Coralville, which is great. New pools pretty much in each city, North Liberty, Coralville, and Iowa City. Lots of great recreation things for the kids to do, t-ball, baseball, softball, soccer, things like that.
Lots of recreation available. There's the Coralville Reservoir. We can go out, take a hike, or throw a kayak in the water and enjoy the weekend. So there's lots of things to do.